Hi, my name is Alejandra. I'm part of Huga, one of the boats in the Global Sumud Flotilla that's right now
Azul
sailing.
Salam, good morning. Quick update from the Global Sumud Flotilla. I'm on Paula 1 and currently anchored in Sicily. As you
We
may
are
know,
now in international waters, but we can see right there.
The boats have finally set sail. About 50 vessels manned with activists from more than 44 countries are making their way to Gaza to deliver humanitarian aid and break Israel's siege. In August, people flew in from all over the world to take part in the Global Sumud Flotilla, a civilian-led movement that follows attempts earlier in the year by individual boats, the Madlin and the Handala.
We did say that we will be back. And today, we show that we are going back.
That is why we are mobilizing people from all over the world coming back even stronger.
But it hasn't exactly been smooth sailing. Coordinating such a massive effort for multiple ports in several different countries has been a challenge. Then there was the bad weather that stalled the mission, and even sabotage. Two of the boats docked in Tunisia came under drone attacks. Surveillance footage showed objects falling on the decks from above and causing fires. There was no real damage or any injuries, but it raised the alarms over the safety of the crews and led to further delays. Until now. After weeks of obstacles, the ships have begun to sail. Over the next few days, their aim is to reach Gaza and deliver the aid. This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your guest host, Ban Barqawi. In this episode, we follow the journey of the largest ever flotilla mission. We look at what international law says about the seas around Gaza, and we ask, is this simply a symbolic act?
So we are anchored off the coast of Sicily right now. We did one day of sailing and now we are waiting for the other boats to catch up with us.
This is Carsey Blanton. She's an American musician and one of the activists sailing with the Global Sumud Flotilla. She spoke to me from her boat shortly after setting sail from the port of Catania.
We have 10 on this boat. We have 4 crew, we have a medic, and we have a journalist and media. I would be the media person there.
The flotilla is mobilizing at a very critical moment for Palestinians in the Strip. The Israeli army has all but decimated Gaza City and forcibly displaced its residents to the south. A UN commission has just determined Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and this comes shortly after a famine was officially declared. The activists on the boat say it's reached a boiling point where they must take drastic action. For them, it's a mission with a cause that's become dear to their hearts.
I was active politically for the past, 6 to 8 years. I've been making more protest songs. And then after October 7th, I felt called to participate in this struggle, mostly because I'm Jewish. And I am seeing Israel and the US use my Jewishness and my family's name against the people of Palestine as sort of cover for the genocide they're committing. And I'm not willing to be used in that way.
People all over the world are watching. There's even an online live tracker of all the vessels. But there's also been some criticism, calling the movement performative and purely symbolic. So what exactly is the point?
We're creating a demonstration to pressure our governments to, in turn, pressure Israel to allow aid into Gaza and to end the occupation of Palestine. We are people who hold powerful passports in many cases, and we're trying to show the way for our governments who have not done the right thing, who have not acted as governments should, and instead are funding, an oppressive regime which is enacting a genocide. So I think to say it's symbolic is kind of missing the point. Like, much of politics is symbolic. That's part of how politics works. And we're actually leveraging power here, which is not just a symbol.
Israel has been besieging Gaza by land, air, and sea for almost 2 decades now. The flotilla is attempting to break that siege and open what they call a humanitarian corridor.
So we're sailing through international waters directly to Gazan waters. So it is actually illegal for Israel to intercept us, which they've done on most of the last 37 missions of these different flotilla organizations. So we're trying to create a situation where boats can bring aid directly to Gaza, and Israel will no longer be illegally intercepting them.
There have been many efforts over the years to do this, but there were no successful flotilla attempts to Gaza since 2010, when the Turkish ship Mavi Marmara was attacked by Israel. It ended in tragedy. 10 activists were killed and dozens were injured. Because of these precedents, all the participants on the Global Sumud Flotilla had to undergo training before they sailed.
We all went through a training to affirm that we would, used no form of violence, including verbal violence. So we've all practiced different scenarios that could happen on this mission and made sure that everyone was ready to respond with total nonviolence.
Karsi couldn't say much about their protocol in case they're intercepted by Israeli authorities, but there are some measures in place.
I can tell you there's a legal team as part of the organization, and so we've all been briefed by legal about the position of our countries in relation to the Israeli government and what we can expect if we are detained.
This time around, there's been a lot more attention and support for the activists. 16 countries have issued a joint statement demanding the protection of the convoy and warning against any attacks or the detention of the participants. On land, there's also been a stronger show of solidarity, support marches and rallies. Dock workers in the Italian city of Genoa threatened to strike and block ports if anything happens to the flotilla boats. The question is, what right does Israel have to intercept them and arrest the crews on board? To understand what international law says about Israel's blockade of Gaza and the efforts to break it, I speak to Jinan Bastaki, Associate Professor of Legal Studies at NYU Abu Dhabi. Before we get into the technicalities of it all, can you give us an understanding of why the sea is so important to Gaza and to its population?
Gaza, as a coastal city, relies very much on the sea, like any coastal city. And before October of 2023, the fishing industry in Gaza was one of the only autonomous sources of food in Gaza. But still, the sea itself provided a lot of jobs just as an industry itself. So even not even directly, but also indirectly. There are estimates that more than 10% of the population relied on the sea in some way, shape, or form for their livelihood. And so it's incredibly important, and therefore the restrictions on it obviously are all the more devastating.
Can you explain what this legal framework is, UNCLOS? What is it exactly and what's its purpose?
The UNCLOS in particular, so the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, what it does is it regulates the rights and obligations of states in terms of the maritime environment. It also tells us in terms of a coastal state, how far is it the territory of the state that's a coastal state, for example? What are the rights of ships that are passing through, for example. In international law, you have kind of three primary sources, one secondary source. So a treaty is one source. So state A signs a treaty with state B. It means that it's binding between them. They both have to follow it. Or it can be a multilateral treaty like UNCLOS, and it's between several countries. There's another source that's called custom or customary international law. This is something that is not written. It develops over time. And it's basically that a large enough number of states, they follow this practice with the belief that it is legally binding. But this is how kind of laws develop before states made treaties and so on and so forth. And so the reason why I mention this, and it's important, is that UNCLOS is seen as many of its articles are codification of what was customary international law. So if I'm part of, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, I'm state A, you're state B, you're also a part of it, so we're both bound by it. But state C can say, well, I'm not bound by it because I've never signed UNCLOS. However, because many of its provisions, many of its articles are actually custom, even if a state is not part of the treaty, they have not ratified the treaty, they are still bound by certain rules.
So UNCLOS, in this context, how does it pertain to Gaza specifically, and then thereafter also to Israel?
So Gaza is a part of the state of Palestine. The state of Palestine has acceded to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and therefore it's also declared its maritime zones. So meaning it's basically stated that 12 nautical miles are part of the territorial sea. Being part of the territorial sea means that it is part of its territory. So all of its laws apply, from immigration law to criminal law to whatever it is, as though it is land. And then you have, the right of exploration, you have the right of exploitation, for example, and things like that. And even though Israel is not a party to UNCLOS, it does not mean that it is not bound by some of the articles that are part of customary international law. Israel has, in previous cases, accepted the customary nature of some of the treaty itself, UNCLOS, in certain disputes with Cyprus, for example, as well as Lebanon. Whatever parts of that treaty are custom, Israel is bound to respect.
So Israel does not own these waters?
No, absolutely not.
This belongs to Palestine as a state?
Yes, absolutely.
And that is agreed upon by all the countries that are party to this treaty?
I mean, it's not about agreed upon. So obviously there's the statehood issue, but for the purposes of the treaty, Palestine is a state and it owns these waters. Even if it didn't, the Palestinian people have a right to self-determination. And as a people who have the right of self-determination, Israel is not permitted to do anything that would alter it. So with the 2024 advisory opinion of the ICJ, they reaffirmed that Israel is the occupying power over all of these territories. And they talked very much about Israel's obligations as an occupying power, particularly that they don't get any claim to sovereignty over anything that is meant to be part of the state of Palestine. Israel can say, well, I don't accept it as a state. It doesn't matter if Israel accepts them as a state or not. Violating the right of self-determination is violating one of these peremptory norms of international law.
Peremptory norms meaning something that cannot be challenged, basically. So then let's take this and apply it to the Global Sumud Flotilla, which is attempting to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza, where we know there is a man-made famine right now. Previous flotillas earlier this year, the Madeleine and Handala, tried to make the same journey and they got intercepted. The same or worse has happened to others in the past. The question is, are these flotillas legal?
Yes. I mean, the simple answer. It would not be legal, or Israel would have a right to, attack them if they're carrying weapons, for example. But these humanitarian convoys, they're carrying humanitarian aid to a place that is being besieged, that by, independent commissions and human rights organizations, they have all said that this is a famine, a starvation that is imposed by the occupying power, which is Israel. I mean, a famine is bad enough. Having a man-made famine is bad enough, right? But then we bring it to the wider context, which is these could be acts that are being imposed upon the people in order to bring about the destruction of the people, right? And so this makes it even more urgent what these flotillas are attempting to do, because they're not only bringing aid to a besieged people, but a people who are at the receiving end of genocidal acts.
We said that Palestine owns the waters around Gaza, but even if it is considered an illegal occupation, it is an occupation. So because Israel occupies Palestine, including Gaza, is it then occupying its waters? And then does that change things?
I mean, because the territorial sea is part of the territory of Gaza, so the occupation can extend there, right? An occupation in international law is a question of fact. So if you have a hostile army that has effective control over a territory, now that territory is occupied. And international law or humanitarian law is not concerned with whether the occupation is legal or not, but now that there is an occupation, what are the laws that are going to govern it? Because what international humanitarian law wants to do is balance between protecting the people. So the occupying power has an obligation towards the people, right? As well as balance between the legitimate security concerns of the occupying power. However, you cannot use your security concerns as an excuse to do whatever you want, especially if you're creating the security situation. And so you're creating an insecure situation. Now you're saying, well, we have to do this because it's our security, but you created it to begin with. So it doesn't change things.
Because you mentioned the siege. Gaza is under air, land, and sea blockade. It's been under this blockade far before this war even started. Is there ever a scenario where a blockade could actually be legal?
So blockades and occupations are different, right? Limited blockades can be permitted. So a blockade in and of itself, again, it's kind of like this neutral thing. It's like, how are you doing it and for what reason are you doing it? So let's just say you have a certain corner of a certain town in which there are enemy combatants and you're fighting with them, and they're also civilians. You may be permitted to besiege them, but you have to also allow the civilians to leave. And so naval blockades, again, they also may be legal, but they have to fulfill certain conditions. And for our purpose here, a blockade is prohibited if the sole purpose of the blockade is to harm the civilian population. So that's number one. Or if it has a disproportionate impact on the civilian population. So the blockade itself becomes illegal if it does one or the other. And again, objectively, you do not have to be an expert, even though experts have said this, that it is disproportionately affecting the civilian population. So this naval blockade is illegal. I mean, this is going to be very interesting because we know that Israel intercepted the Mavi Marmara in 2010. There was an independent UN commission, and they basically said these are humanitarian convoys. It's a symbolic amount. I mean, you have 2.2 million people in Gaza, right? But the point is Israel is under obligation to allow this humanitarian aid in. Secondly, they said there was no legal justification for intercepting these flotillas. And so in that time, the independent commission was saying, look at the effect that it's having on civilians, the fact that, people are food insecure. And again, as bad as things were then, not probably near as bad as they are now. So what do we say about the illegality of these operations against the flotilla as well as the blockade itself?
So the ones that they intercepted are considered illegal arrests?
If a convoy is bringing humanitarian aid, you may be allowed to intercept it in order to basically look at whether what they are going to be importing are, weapons or humanitarian supplies. Just kind of checking, okay, you're not bringing any weapons, you're bringing baby formula, when you're bringing diapers in and you're bringing food. However, we also have to know that these people are civilians, and under the Geneva Conventions, they are protected persons because they are not combatants. And so Israel is not allowed to kill people, which is what it did Mavi Marmara and other flotillas as well, send drones to attack them. So even when we're talking about arresting, we're talking about crimes. These people have committed no crimes. And so these actions, of course, they are illegal.
And so even now, because there's this exceptional time of war, I mean, we've seen Israel further restrict items in its blockade. There are lots of items that they have actually not allowed because they say they're dual-use items. Could they use that pretext for these flotilla ships and be like, well, this is actually on our dual item list and it's restricted and therefore we can prevent you from delivering aid?
So, I mean, throughout the years, Israel has put very random items on prohibited lists, sometimes coriander, sometimes chocolate, not because they're dual use, but because they're considered luxury items. And so that is also not allowed. I mean, who decides whether coriander is a luxury item or not, right? And also, Israel's definition of what is dual use is far beyond international standards. I'm not sure how ingenious you have to be to use baby formula to harm people, but I'm pretty sure that is not a dual-use item, right? I mean, the people on board these flotillas have all received also extensive training in nonviolence and so on and so forth. They know the law. They're not just going there kind of on a whim and saying, we're just going to break the siege. What they're doing is saying, we are bringing certain items that we know for sure are humanitarian supplies. And Israel's not even making that argument. Even with their expansive definition, they can't apply it here.
Why is it that activists are doing this? We're saying there's a genocide, there's a man-made famine, that they are doing this within, every legal parameter, really. Why can't countries do this? Does this create sort of a political clash? Mm-hmm. Because then it's like, oh, well, you might have a foreign policy agenda and we don't know what your intentions are, whereas activists are kind of neutral actors.
No, I mean, so the reason why activists are doing this is because states are not doing what they're actually obligated to do. This is established law. So if I will give you an example from the ICJ case in terms of Bosnia v. Serbia from 2007. Serbia was accused of committing genocide, but also being complicit in genocide, but also failing to prevent genocide. What the ICJ said at the time, they said states actually must use all legal means. Whatever capacity they have to influence the offending state, they have to use it. And they said, military, financial, I think they mentioned diplomatic, but then they said any other. They're saying we're not limiting it here. Whatever you as a state that can do, whatever you can leverage. If you have diplomatic ties, if you have trade agreements, if you have whatever privileges you might be giving to the state, you are actually under obligation to do something about it in order to contribute to ending the genocide. So the reason why these activists are doing it, and the special rapporteur on human rights in the OPT, Francesca Albanese, she actually said this explicitly. They're doing this because states are actually not abiding by their obligations. So now you have civil society who are, in as much as they can, trying to force these states, or this state in particular, to abide by its obligations under international law and bring attention to it so that something can happen.
That's it for Beyond the Headlines. Visit thenationalnews.com for updates on the situation in Gaza as they happen. This episode was produced and hosted by me, Ban Barqawi, and audio engineered by Arthur Edison. And Dua Farid is our editor. Thank you for listening.